Now, aviation is a key part of the travel and tourism ecosystem, and the sector has just had its worst year ever. In Africa, commercial aviation is struggling to get back off the ground after prolonged travel restrictions and lockdowns. Motheo Khoaripe reports.
One of Africa's biggest airlines, Kenya Airways, was optimistic a recovery was around the corner. The carrier resumed international flights in August after months of planes sitting idle due to the pandemic.
We are extremely excited to start this because it's been 130 days since we did this. Airlines are supposed to fly, and so we are back to business.
But since then, the company has had a reality check. Last week, the carrier said its losses for last year tripled compared to 2019 to $333 million. In response, it's laid off about 40% of its workforce and slashed salaries, and the rest of the continent hasn't fared much better. The International Air Travel Association says African airlines carried 60 million passengers last year, down 61% from the previous 12 months. The steep decline in demand resulted in the permanent closure of 4 carriers, including Air Mauritius and Air Namibia. South African Airways managed to survive with the help of a $350 million state bailout. Egypt Air is also getting $400 million from its government. Ethiopian Airlines is the sole exception. Africa's largest carrier has fared relatively well and says it hopes to remain profitable this year.
This company is an amazing company. I think we are going to survive. We're going to survive. We will do whatever it takes to make sure that we survive.
But prospects for other airlines remain dim. The International Air Transport Association says the vaccine rollout has been slow in Africa compared to regions like North America and Europe. That means a return to pre-pandemic passenger numbers will likely not be achieved until at least 2023. Motheo Khoaripe, TRT World.
Ogaga Udjo is an aviation consultant and managing director at ZA Logics. He joins us now from Johannesburg, South Africa. Welcome to the show. Now let's break this down. Are all African airlines equally endangered, or are some likely to fare better than others?
Thank you so much for having me on your show. That's an interesting question. I would say that it is a bit of a mixed bag, but overall, when African aviation entered into the pandemic, we were doing so on a fairly weak position from a financial perspective. I think entering the pandemic, African airlines were expected to lose about $200 million US, and some are faring better than others. As per your opening segment, there are some state-owned carriers that have really been struggling, very few that are doing well, and other private operators that are also having mixed performance as well. So it really is a mixed bag depending on the model of airline and depending on where it is located in Africa.
So we'll come to the model in a moment, but first, we saw that most African countries shut down their borders between March and September. Do you think that worsened the position for airlines?
Most certainly it did, but I think as we saw progressively over the region, it was really an initial response to the public health crisis. The lockdowns have been quite severe, and from an aviation perspective, it has certainly impacted the industry. But what we are starting to see now is that domestic aviation is really driving the initial starts of recovery, which hopefully should mitigate to some extent these severe restrictions. But they certainly did not help the industry.
Now we have discussion going on at least between Kenya Airways and Ethiopian Airlines about possibly having a COVID-19 passport. Do you think that's something that could help revive the industry's fortunes, or at least get more customers, get more passengers on board sooner?
Yes, so as an industry, we've recognized that we really have to inspire confidence to really inspire travel. And I think aviation is really well placed to respond to these crises, given how heavily regulated and global our industry is. So this digital passport is actually the IATA, International Air Transport Association initiative, and Ethiopian Airlines and Kenya Airways are the first African airlines to trial it. And we certainly support this move because it deals with two elements. It deals with standardization around the COVID response from a testing and vaccine verification perspective. And it also, at a customer level, inspires a level of confidence because this is also done digitally by the digital pass. And I certainly expect more IATA members and more airlines to join this global trial. But it is under the IATA initiative of the travel pass.
Very quickly, if I can ask you one last question, do you expect to see a lot of mergers and acquisitions in the industry, especially in Africa, or do you think that the countries, or different countries, are going to protect their flag carriers whether or not they're profitable?
It will really be a mix of both. Mergers and acquisitions are inevitable because what COVID has recognized and exposed is some of the structural deficiencies in African aviation. The extent of those mergers and acquisitions will really depend on political will, because about 70% of all capacity supplied in African aviation is from state-owned airlines. So it is a mix of the commercial response versus political will. But I certainly expect, from a market recovery perspective, that more mergers and consolidation occurs across the industry.
Thank you so much, Ogaga Udjo, there, telling us about how he expects more mergers and acquisitions and certainly a lot more activity in the African aviation market in months ahead.